Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Orn and in today's video I'll be walking you through 5 of my favourite books from 2021. 2021 was a great year for reading for me. With the growth of my podcast Book Talk Today, I've had some amazing guests on and had an opportunity to read some amazing books over the past year. So in today's video, I wanted to walk you through 5 of my favourite non-fiction books from 2021. Unfortunately, I didn't read enough fiction during the year in order to add any to the list. I had a couple from Dostoevsky that I could have added, but I didn't want to just add 1 or 2 to the list. I thought it'd be nice to equal fiction to non-fiction. And that's actually one of my goals for 2022, is to add a lot more fiction to that list. So hopefully the list for 2022 will include some more fiction books. The 5 books that I mentioned in this video are in no particular order and in no order of preference. They just come up with the order that I have made it for this video. And any links to purchase the book or any links to watch the podcast that I did with the author will be in the description below, so you can go check that out as well. The first book in my list of favourite books of 2021 is The Map of Knowledge by Violet Moller. And I love reading history. I've read history extensively since I was a kid. And the thing that I loved about this particular book is that it tracks 7 ancient cities and how information spread from one city to another between the years 500 to 1500 AD. Cities such as Alexandria in Egypt, Baghdad in Iraq, Toledo and Cordoba in Spain, and Palermo, Salerno and Venice in Italy. And the thing that I loved about this book is this central idea that we have a shared history and heritage. There is this preconception that, with Western Enlightenment, especially in Europe in the 17 and 1800s, it was this idea that ideas were created there. But I think when you read this book, you get this idea that knowledge spread from east to west. And what happened during that period was this Latinization of Arabic and Greek texts into Latin, which enabled people reading it to think that it was actually Western ideas, where a lot of them actually originated in the East. Violet's very passionate about this topic, and in our podcast she was very passionate about her premise of writing the book, which is to enlighten us into this idea that we have a shared history and culture between us all. And if we're to move forward into the future and try and break down barriers between one another, it's important to read about this shared history and heritage. And I think the book does an excellent job in showcasing this. And for anyone who doesn't like reading history or is someone who wants a broad look at a specific field in history, I definitely think this is a great book to add to your list. And as someone who loves to read history, I think history sometimes gets a bit too dense and in-depth on a certain topic. But the reason why I added this one to my list is it's more broad than most history books and is applicable to someone who is well read in history, like myself, or is someone who is looking for an introductory book into history as well. So if you're someone in either of those 2 camps, I definitely recommend picking up the book and also checking out the podcast that I did with Violet. The second book in my list is The Status Game by Will Storr, and Will remains one of my favourite authors. His book The Science of Storytelling and Selfie are among one of my favourites books that I've read. And in the book The Status Game, he builds up on these ideas that he mentions in The Science of Storytelling and Selfie, which is this idea of the brain and the way our brain tricks us into believing many, many different things. And in this book specifically, it focuses on this idea of status and how we're driven by status in society. We all play status games, whether it be in social media or whether it be with our friendships and our close friendships even so. This idea of playing status is a very ancient concept, and we did it when we were in tribes, and as technology has grown, the medium for status games has changed, and I think the intensity has changed as well. The way that people play status games online, whether it be trolling others or making them seem morally superior to others, is very evident. Even status games in sense of money and fame have become heightened with the internet and social media usage. And in this book, he talks about those ideas. He mentions different cults. The human metamorphosis was one cult that he mentioned in the book, which was uniquely hilarious, which I enjoyed reading. And when he came on the podcast, it was something we spoke about as well. The thing about Will's books is they are very intense. If you're someone who likes reading, I like to put the category as journalism, but like contemporary journalism, because there's not quite a specific subject, but it's a broad look at a certain issue and subject, but done in like a long blog type. And that's why I like Will's books, but they are very dense and they are very intense to read. So if you're someone who's looking for, let's say, an easy read or something that's a bit light, I definitely don't recommend picking up, to be honest, any of Will's books. But if you're someone who really likes to go deep into a subject and try to understand something to a granular level, then The Status Game is a wonderful book. And if you're someone who's actually interested in neuroscience and psychology and how humans interact with one another and how our brain interacts with the world and how it shows us only part of the picture, I definitely recommend picking up this book, because the way that Will explains it is he doesn't explain it from a scientific point of view. So it's not, you're not reading a book that's delving into how, for instance, the amygdala or the hippocampus retrieve information and how that, you know, changes brain behavior. But it's more in how our brains have changed and adapt based on internal stimulus of our environment changing over time. And if you're someone who's interested in that and reading about it in a very, you know, compelling and interesting way, then Will's books are definitely a great introduction in that. And I think Status Game is a great book to add to your list. And if you're interested in checking out the podcast I did with Will, the link is in the description below. The third book in my list is How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, The Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius by Donald Robertson. And Donald was another person that came on the podcast this year, the Book Talk Today podcast. And the reason why I invited him on is I've never had someone on the podcast to talk about Stoicism. I've read about Stoicism widely, mainly through Ryan Holiday over the past couple of years. You know, Ryan Holiday's books on Stoicism are great, and I wouldn't consider myself to be a Stoic, but I definitely find the principles that Stoicism talks about to be relevant in this day. However, sometimes when you read ancient philosophy, it's difficult to bring the philosophy from 1,000 years into today's world. And the reason why I added this book to my favorites of the list is that Donald is a practicing cognitive behavioral therapist. And in the book, he talks about how you can use Stoic practices to actually alleviate some mental health issues, whether they be anxiety or depression. And mental health is a very big thing at the moment, and I think that it's great that there's so much more awareness about mental health globally. But I do still think that there's deep-rooted ideas in philosophy that we can all apply in our lives to make our lives better. And this book is so great because it brings that ancient part of philosophy, but pairs it and tethers it onto this idea of cognitive behavioral therapy, so you can actually use it and practice it daily. One of the main ideas I took from this book was based on the quote by the Delphic Oracle, which said that, you know, take on the color of dead men. And this is something I'm going to talk about for quite some time. I feel like I've been mentioning it everywhere, but it's this idea that it's our jobs to learn from those that have come before us. And even if they're presently alive, the people that you learn from, or if they've deceased, I think it's really important to focus our attention on learning from others, whether it's good or bad. I think sometimes we can learn, you know, what not to do better from other people than what actually to do. And this book is really great in explaining, you know, taking on the color of dead men. So focusing our attention on learning from those who have come before us and actually learning, whether it be from reading or watching documentaries, you know, the medium doesn't particularly matter, or just pure observation, and understanding what it means to actually be a better person, not so much just purely from a moral point of view, but actually in action and practice. So if you're someone who is looking to learn a bit more about Stoicism, or an introductory book into Stoicism and the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, who was Roman emperor, then I definitely recommend this book. But also if you're someone who has read Stoicism before and you're looking to actually find a good book to actually understand how to transfer the philosophies of Stoicism and actually apply it into your life and improve your mental health and mental well-being, then I definitely recommend picking up this book and adding to your list. And also, if you want to listen to the podcast, you can as well. Link in the description. The fourth book in my list is Ultralearning, Accelerate Your Career, Master Hard Skills and Outsmart the Competition by Scott H. Young. And Scott was another of the authors that came on my podcast. Don't worry, I'm just not selecting books of authors that have come on my podcast. But the reason why I added this book to the list is we all come across books that we read and we don't really find anything to apply from them. You know, we read them, we get to the end of them, and we feel like, okay, that was an interesting book, and then we move on to the next one. And the reason why I added this one to one of my favorites of 2021 was this idea that we don't see learning as a skill. It's something that we have to do. Every time we start a new skill, or whether we're a student, whether we want to learn a new language, whatever it might be, we always start the task, but we never actually think about, you know, what's the best way to approach learning. And in this book, Scott highlights 9 principles that we can use to become an ultra learner, which is someone who uses the right techniques and practices in their approach to learning new skills to accelerate their progress. You know, not necessarily to do it quicker, but perhaps to do it more efficiently and to get the most value from it. Out of the 9 principles in the book, I actually like the first one the best, and it's this idea of meta learning, which is this idea that before you embark on any learning journey, it's important to draw out a map. And I think this is really important for everything that you do. And I actually suggest this if you're going to start any book, have a question in mind, and meta learning is the same principle just for learning, which is the idea that draw out the map, know why you're learning the thing, understand what are the best practices to do for learning that particular thing. So if it's a language, you know, it's best to speak to someone who is a native in that language. Or if you, for instance, you want to learn or become, you know, more physically active, it's understand what a runner does or what a bodybuilder does to gain muscle or get their nutrition right, you know, what training program to follow. Meta learning and drawing out a map for starting any new skill is often more important than actually doing the learning, because what you don't want to do is start something and then end up going in the wrong direction. You know, taking the time to draw out the map means that at least you know you're on the right path, so that when you make progress, that progress is more efficient and long lasting than someone who is moving around and zigzagging over time. The main reason I added this book to my list is that I'm someone who is always learning a new skill or is always learning something new, but I've never really read a book about how to become a better learner, and I've already taken so many points from this book and also from the conversation that I had with Scott. And I think everyone is always learning something new, whether consciously or subconsciously. You know, whether you're at work, you're learning a new skill or a new technique or a new piece of software, whether you're a student, you're always learning. I think learning is something that everyone is doing right now. With changing in technology, it's only going to increase as well. So if you're someone who's actually looking for like 9 principles or the best practices to become a better learner, then I definitely recommend picking up this book. And it's a book that is applicable to everyone. This is why I think everyone should read it and why you should add it to your list. And if you're looking for a great introduction, you can listen to the podcast as well. Link in the description. So the last and 5th book in my list of favorite books in 2021 is the book 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. Now, I've read Yuval's previous 2 books, Sapiens and Homo Deus. Sapiens was a brief history of mankind, which was a look back into history, into how our society is formed and the developments that we've made, whether it be the Industrial Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution. But it was very much a look back into the past. Homo Deus was the opposite. It was a look into the future. For instance, the big conversation topic in Homo Deus was artificial intelligence and what that could look like. But in 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, I think he sort of applies both of those books together, but it's more structured in a way of asking 21 lessons that we can learn from the past and also looking into the future that we can learn in order to make the world better. And it's 300 pages of essentially Yuval asking questions to the reader about certain topics. And the book is split up into 5 separate parts that tackle these 21 lessons to give really a holistic view to the reader about how they should view the future. There are many big topics talked about in this book, and similar to Will Storr's books, Yuval's books are very dense, they're very in-depth. I know Sapiens took me a while to get through, and so did Homo Deus. This one I actually think was his easiest book to read. Sapiens was very difficult to get through, and so was Homo Deus, but I definitely actually think this one was a great book to go through. You don't necessarily need to read Sapiens and Homo Deus before reading this one. I'm not too sure if they're a trilogy. Perhaps I should have done some research on that, but definitely it will help you to understand this one better if you do read Sapiens and Homo Deus, but I don't necessarily think it is a must. And there are many lessons mentioned in this book, 21 specifically, but the one that I really liked was this idea of post-truth. He dedicates a chapter to this idea, and it's this idea that truth is something that is interesting, because you could be a pluralist and you could be someone to say that, you know, each one of us has their own definition of truth, or you could be someone who follows a religious doctrine to say there's only one truth and that is the religion you fall under, or you can even be someone who is an ideologist and say, for instance, like a Marxist or a neoliberalist, to say, you know, there's only one definition of truth. But in the book he addresses these concerns, and in the chapter he talks about this idea that we will live in this idea of post-truth where there is no such truth. And the thing that really he highlights in that chapter is this idea that lies, you know, Donald Trump calls them fake news, but lies sometimes hang around so long that they morph into truth. And over periods of history, you can see how lies turned into periods of truth. You know, whether you look at Nazi Germany or you look at Soviet Russia in the early 1900s, you know, they were lies, but they were spread as truth, and they festered into things that were pernicious and caused millions of people to die. And what does that look like for our future? You know, with climate change, with global poverty, with, you know, a retort to capitalism. It's interesting to see what ideas of post-truth will look like in 50 to 100 years if we are around to live like that. So, like I said, if you're someone who is interested in reading Yuval's books, then 21 Lessons for the 21st Century is definitely one to add to your list. I would recommend reading Sapiens and Homo Deus before, but I don't necessarily think it's a must. You can read this one first and then go back to Sapiens and Homo Deus later if you're interested. But yes, definitely add this to your list of reading. So that's my list of 5 of my favorite non-fiction books from 2021. Hopefully you found this video helpful and you are excited to read some of these books and add it to your to-be-read list of 2022. Thank you so much for subscribing to the channel again. If you haven't already, please do like, share, and subscribe for more content. Hopefully I'll be doing more videos on this channel in 2022. The last couple of months have been fairly busy for me as I've been focusing on retraining to be a web developer and programmer, as well as focusing on the podcast Book Talk Today. So hopefully I'll be spending some more time into 2022 making videos on this channel. And if you haven't already subscribed to my podcast, please do. The podcast is called Book Talk Today, and you can listen to the interviews for some of these authors that I mentioned today. Thank you so much again for watching this video. Have a great new year, and I'll see you in the next video.